I'm alive. I shouldn't be.
He should not be alive. This is unfucking believable.
From the heart of trucker America, my boy Reed Coverdale, host of The Naturalist Capitalist.
This is what government does. It sucks.
If you think you're going to win people over by stating commonplaces, you're just selling the other part.
It is about dictating every transaction that you have for the rest of your life.
Mr. Potato Head.
Coverdale is the guy to be president of the United States.
You intimidated me with your perfect 74 stab.
That was the beginning of my problems.
He died doing what he loved, chasing a minor.
But I'll put a 50 cal attached to my Suburban.
Libertarians need to get out of New York.
The gulag is going to be in your house.
This guy's a fucking murderer. He deserves to be in a
Gotta
dungeon.
get him out of that truck at night and get him into the White House.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist. I'm your host, Reed Coverdale. If you're new to the channel, please give me a subscription. And if you've just been following me on YouTube, make sure you look at the links listed in the description and follow me everywhere else. But specifically on Substack, I'm writing articles like 2 or 3 times a week. And then Telegram, I'm using that as an alternative to Twitter because I am one of the no people who's not allowed on Twitter at all anymore. My name is banned. I shall not return, at least as of now. So just make sure you follow me on all those platforms. But I got a good show tonight. A guest who's been on the show several times, returning again. He was the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. Spike Cohen, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing fantastic, man. And I will admit, I would otherwise be kind of neutral as to whether or not Elon Musk ends up actually buying Twitter, but I still want him to buy Twitter just because I'm pretty sure that means you'll end up back on Twitter. Like, I think that's probably short of that. I don't think you're going to end up back on Twitter, but I do think if he buys it, it'll be like just open season for everyone and you'll be back on Twitter. But I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, absolutely. I remember you were probably one of the most horrified, high-profile people at the creation of Clint Coverdale and Reed Russell, those two parody accounts that were running around. The abomination that is, yeah. So when I told Reed Russell that I would shoot him if he came within 100 yards of my truck, I don't think I said anything false. I mean, if that abomination came anywhere near my truck, I would defend myself and my property. And I think that's fully within my rights. So I'm not really, I think anyone who kills Reed Russell or Clint Coverdale was the other one, which looked even worse. Like whatever monstrosity Reed Russell was, Clint Coverdale made that look normal. Anyone who rids our planet, our society, and our gene pool of those two characters, I think is a hero. I mean, forget talking about the rights and so forth. That's another discussion. I think they're heroes, and I think that they will be remembered as the people that saved humanity from those two absolute monstrosities. So the fact that you were simply saying, if you get within my property, I'll kill you, I think that was a almost a centrist position. Yeah, a pretty moderate position on that. Yeah, I agree. I mean, they hated me because I told the truth. What can I say? But it is kind of funny. Lots of my friends have been banned off of Twitter. So Facebook has actually gotten more interesting because I haven't used Facebook regularly in a while, at least for political stuff. I just go look like once a week. Okay, what did my aunt post on here or whatever? But it's gotten a little bit, it's gotten a little more edgy and a little more fun and a little more interesting because everyone has used all of their friends and family's phone numbers to make alt Twitter accounts, and they've run out of them. They're like, okay, I guess I'm going to use my Facebook account that I haven't used for 6 years and just figure out where the lines are. But I haven't pushed as hard because it's funny. People ask me, how can you be banned off of Twitter and still have a Facebook account? And it's like, well, Twitter is like your political fans who follow you when it's your grandmother and your aunt and your uncle and your the people that went to church with you when you were a kid or whatever. You just tread a little bit more lightly. So I'm still there for now. But. Yeah. most of my like actual Facebook friends on my Facebook, on my personal account, are either family members, people I grew up with, people I went to school with. But the biggest group is not political. It's you know this, Tasha and I are really big into the Latin dance scene. Like we do salsa dancing and stuff like that. And so I'd say half of my friends list is salsa people, like salsa dancers and salsa instructors and people I've met at salsa socials and things like that. And so like I really don't do political stuff on my personal profile. On my page, obviously I do that stuff. But on my personal profile, I share like stupid memes and jokes and like, you know, recipes for meals I've made and stuff. Like I am a basic white girl on my Facebook. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. It's funny. I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s when like kind of before social media really started fledging. I was a teenager when it started turning into something. And I just can't imagine growing up in a world where social media is a thing, like as a little kid and being allowed to use it. Because when I was 10 there might be an age restriction on Facebook. I'm not sure if there is, there might be, but
I think there technically is one, but I have like relatives who they were on there when they were like 7 and 8 and stuff. So I mean, it's not real. Doesn't stop anyone.
Yeah, doesn't stop anybody. So I mean, when I was like 8 or 10 or 12 or even like 14, if I was if I was bored, I just had to go outside and grab a stick and pretend I was fighting the redcoats out in the woods by myself or with my brothers and sisters. And I feel like we've had our society has been impacted by this constant validation from all your friends all the time by just posting a picture of whatever you're eating for breakfast or lunch or dinner or whatever. Or
this is me now. You're describing me now, but yeah, go ahead. No, but you're right. Like growing up like that, yeah.
I mean, it was you had to go create your own world and create your own, basically your own validation. Like you weren't just going to get it from everyone all around you. You had to actually make things yourself. And then when you actually had to do real things, I don't know, you seem to care about the important things when it comes to validation more than the dumb things, because all the dumb things, you were just validating yourself with them because they were things you'd created in your mind as a kid or whatever. So then when the important tasks came along, those were the things that you wanted to impress other people with, I guess. But now it's like almost the opposite. Kids care more about their social media profiles than their bank account, or if they're old enough to have a car, that their car works or anything like that. Like it's all come down to this societal validation. And I think that's I don't know, I don't think that's good, but I was wondering what you thought about that.
So I think what we're seeing is that the product of social media has been so successful, and that its actual goal of making us addicted to it, so that, because keep in mind, social media, we're actually the product.
Right.
The product is what's being sold, what they make money from isn't from us. I mean, we don't pay to use it, right? We're the product. They make their money from selling our data and our interests and everything else to social media, to advertisers. That's how they make their money. Now, the reality is that means that in order for them to make as much money as possible, they need us to be as engaged with it as possible. So they've literally created these things to tap into us psychologically and make us want to be on it as much as humanly possible. And that's not just, they add new interesting services, things you can do on it, live streaming, augmented reality and things like that. And a lot of them are actually pretty cool. Like I think it's awesome that I can live stream anytime I want to, just by taking out my phone and stuff. And it's been very useful in the activism I've been doing and things like that. So it's not all bad, but that's not really how they get you. They get you by creating this experience where you increasingly rely on the dopamine that you're getting from this sort of feedback loop of people validating you and saying, yes, I like your picture of, your shrimp saute that you just put up, or your opinion that you just gave about this or whatever else. But the thing is, if you're geared towards trying to maximize acceptance, that pushes everyone into the lowest common denominator on opinion, on their thoughts, on their values, to really whatever's going to, whether they even realize they're doing this or not, it's gearing them towards just saying whatever is the most popular thing. And that's where the whole, I support the current thing
came from, because it really is like, oh, well, I know that if I put, you know, the Ukraine emoji in my name on Twitter, or if I put that profile picture up, that profile filter up on Facebook, that's going to get a bunch of people saying, yeah, I also stand with that, or whatever. Or even on the other side, for, you know, people that are the counterculture, to put up the I support the current thing, that's become its own current thing in that group, right? So like, this is it is a problem, and especially for kids. We're adults. I am grateful that I grew up in the 80s and 90s, because I just turned 40. I am like the first batch of millennials. I really identify more with Gen X than millennials, but I technically am a millennial. But we didn't have internet until I was, I believe, 13. And it was dial up, AOL chat rooms. And I remember even how addictive that was, but we didn't have the internet like that. And we didn't have social media until I was into my 20s. And I'm very grateful for that. One reason I'm grateful for that is I would be canceled for the stuff that I can't picture the stuff we would say as kids, and that being on the internet where anyone can search it and archive it. That's a recipe for an absolute nightmare, at least for me. So, I mean, I absolutely would have been the one getting in trouble. I mean, so South Carolina doesn't have a statute of limitations on any crime. So I'm careful to say what I did, but I did a lot. And I would have advertised on social media because I was an idiot. I was a kid. So I am glad that didn't exist, but also because, like you said, I was able to kind of have actual experiences as a child. Like you said, if you wanted to have fun, you would go outside and you'd pick up a stick, or you'd pick up, a toy, and you would pretend that you were whatever, and you would play with friends, which is different than social media. Actually interacting with human beings as you're developing is completely different than social media. It's learning how to be a person around other people. And it's very simple in its play, but it is an important thing. It's part of human development. And it's something that increasingly doesn't exist. I will look at 3-year-olds staring at a tablet or a phone screen, having no interest in what's happening around them. And I was a freaking hyper manic nightmare as a kid, like running around and talking to people. They have zero interest in anything because this is way more interesting to them than anything they're seeing out there. And I think it's a huge problem. We're not going to really know the consequences of it for many years, because most of us still grew up normally. So it's going to take a while to see how this plays out, but I'm concerned.
Yeah, we grew up a little bit behind our times. I was born in 94, but we didn't get a computer, I don't think, until 2006. So I would have been 12.
Okay.
And I didn't own a cell phone until I was 18. Even though, they were out when I was a kid or whatever, but I just never got one. And I remember even when I started working at the power line company and like going around setting utility poles and doing jobs everywhere, I didn't have a GPS or anything. I just had one of those address books, and they'd give you an address, and then you'd find the town, you'd open the page up, figure out where the address was, and then figure out how you're going to get there. And I just never thought of needing a GPS. Like, it was just a ridiculous idea that you'd ever need it. But then I eventually got a smartphone, and then I needed one for my job because my boss had to send me video files and all this type of stuff. And then you start using it, and then you get to the point where you just can't imagine not having it anymore. It's like, man, how was I just that able to go do my job without having this thing with me? And I've kind of caught myself a couple times. I remember I was backpacking with my dad and my uncle, my mom, and a friend. And so we were out in the woods, but there was a little bit of cell phone service. And so I was telling my uncle about this video we had made several years ago. And so then I pulled it up on my phone, and it started playing. And like halfway through, it started buffering, and it was getting a little exasperated. I was like, wait a second, you are out in the middle of the woods, and you're playing a video that you made, and it's buffering. You grew up without a computer, and then by the time you were 12, you had dial-up internet forever, and you'd have to sit there and wait for an hour for the video to buffer and then load, and then you could play 15 minutes or whatever. Like, you have become so complacent and so spoiled. And I don't know, do you catch yourself with that type of stuff nowadays, especially growing up earlier than I did?
Oh, constantly. And it's interesting. So you're like, I think close. How old are you?
28.
Okay, so you're 12 years younger than me, but because of your life situation that how you grew up, you're basically the same. Yeah, because when you said played with a stick, and I'm like, aren't you like late 20s, early 30s? But that's why, right? Like you actually, and it's probably all for the best, honestly. Like I said, I'm grateful for having that perspective of what it was like before all of that. And I will say there are certainly quite a few positives, especially the activism that I'm doing to be able to organize for, people to come from across the state to come to an event and then live stream it to everyone else and be able to reach, tens, hundreds of thousands of people. That's incredible. Like that, it has a use and a purpose. It is a good thing. But do I catch myself like being way too into it? Yeah, a lot, especially because I have to be on it a lot to be able to do the work that I do. The moment that I find myself frustrated by a comment, insulting, disagreeing, whatever comment or tweet or whatever from someone I don't even know, is that I have actually made that, like noted that as the second you feel that, you disconnect, because that's one of them. And there are a few different things that I've set up where it's like, if this happens, disconnect, get off of the internet, shut your phone off, put it on silent, go outside, go to the beach, go do something, go spend time, go do something with your wife, your life partner who has dedicated herself to you while you're sitting there smashing on a phone. Like, and it's because like when those things happen, those are just cues that this is way more important than it should be. Like it doesn't, it literally doesn't matter. And you are allowing it to ruin potentially your day, but even just that second, you're letting it ruin your second when it shouldn't even matter. And that has helped me a lot. Like having like just a handful of things that when that happens. And one of them is if I see like, and usually it's not like just someone disagreeing with me. I don't care if someone disagrees with me. I usually respond. But like someone saying something like insulting. I think what bothers me the most is when someone will either attack someone I care about, or when they'll say something about me that's just flat out disprovable and false. And it's obvious they made it up. They have no idea what they're talking about. Those things are the things that really get me. The other stuff is like, yeah, whatever. I don't really care. But those ones, when those happen, and I'll get upset, and it's like, wait a second, this might be often it's like a sock account with a pseudonym and everything. It's like, this is not. But even if it's a real, a person with their whole thing,
it's Clint Coverdale and Reed Russell.
It's Clint Coverdale and Reed Russell, those sons of bitches. Again, they need to die. They must die, and not because actually they're very nice to me. But they must die.
Me too, but I hate them. Yeah, I mean, just the way it is.
I mean, it's just look at them. Like there is that will infect our gene pool, and there will be ripple effects for generations. They have to die. But so when these things will happen, I just realize I'm like, I don't know this person. No, and usually like no one has reacted, or someone's already replied and told them they're stupid. Like who cares? Like, why does this matter? And the problem is, the reason it mattered even that in that moment is when the more time you're spending on it, whether you like it or not, that feedback loop is affecting your psychological response to it. It would be like saying, oh, well, my job requires me to take small amounts of cocaine and just put it by the sides of my nose and breathe in real heavily. But I don't do cocaine, you see, and I'm not a cocaine addict, but my job does require me to consume tiny amounts of cocaine throughout the day. Hey, why am I so dependent on cocaine? Like this. And so when you are, especially if you have to be doing social media, if that's a part of what it is you do, or even if it's just something you really enjoy, you have to set some things that when this happens, that's a cue that you need to disconnect, because you're making this way too important than it actually is. That's what I do anyway.
Yeah. So I was wondering, were there early signs that you were going to be sort of a rebel against the system when you were a kid? Could you trace that back to early times in your life? Because with me, I'd say on a bell curve, I was a pretty obedient, good kid. But in my family, I was definitely one of the more obstinate, more rebellious. If I was told I wasn't allowed to do something, it would instantly pique my interest, and I'd go pursue doing it and get in trouble or whatever. But I was wondering, was there early signs of that type of thing with you as a kid, or do you think that's something that formed later on?
I changed my name when I was 3, and I insisted that everyone use it. And I refused to talk to my parents for days at a time because they would not. I've always been like this. I was a little annoying anarchist, and I've grown into being a large annoying anarchist now. So I mean, it's really, I've stayed on brand the whole time. No, I have always, been. I will say my parents gave me a really good moral compass on what is right and what is wrong, and the values of that, and I've always stuck with that. But with them, when they would tell me, you need to do this, I would say, why? And if the answer was, well, because I told you to, that wasn't even close to good enough. And so by the time I was like 5, 6 years old, they had pretty much given up on trying to say, well, do it because I told you to. It was, well, because if you do this, then this happens and whatever. And if it made sense, I did. But there were times I'd say, well, you know what? I don't think that's the case. And I would do whatever the thing is. And then I'd learn on my own. Maybe they were right. But usually they were almost always right. But I would learn on my own from that thing. Of not listening to them, that the consequence they said would happen typically did happen. But yeah, I've always rejected authority on its own. Like the idea of just authority because of authority. Well, who gave you authority? Like I remember very early on saying things like, I mean, this would have been probably at maybe 7 or 8, a teacher saying to me, well, you have to listen to me because I'm your teacher. And I'd say something like, well, why don't you have to listen to me because I'm your student? Like it did. The fact that you were bigger than me, older than me, in a position or whatever, didn't actually mean anything to me. Like it is what you're saying right or wrong? Does it make sense or not? That is what you'll get. You'll get me with persuasion. You appealing to your own authority means absolutely nothing to me. As you can imagine, this made me an absolute nightmare of a child. And I was it's an absolute blessing that I am not, in prison or, shot by police or something like that. Because I didn't just test boundaries. I didn't acknowledge the existence of authority made boundaries. I would determine based on, my perception or from the persuasion of others, whether something was right or wrong or the way to do something or not. I will say, unlike a lot of people who got into drugs because it was the cool thing to do or because of trauma, I mean, maybe some trauma in my life might have led me into drugs or some of the depression I had might have done it. I think the biggest thing was because it was illegal. And I was like, well, you're not going to tell me I can't do it. I'll do it myself and see if I like it. I did like it. I definitely liked it. So no, I've always been this way. If anything, I've had to become more mature and temper how I communicate, because I used to just scream in people's faces that I'm not going to listen to you, and I don't do that anymore very often. So
yeah, I was going to say there's a fine line between just being an obstinate asshole and questioning things that deserve to be questioned and being skeptical when you should, because I was probably more the first one when I was younger. There wasn't a ton of logic to my reasoning either. Sometimes I would just not do something because I was told to do it. And it's that's not always the best reason to not do something. Sometimes if they're telling you to do something, it kind of makes sense. But I am happy with kind of the moderation I've arrived at now, which is if they're really telling me to do something that doesn't make any sense, I'm going to be wondering why they're doing that and try to look into it more. With me, I think where it really started was, or where it started to take its mature form, I was working at a Christian camp during the summers, and I was like a counselor in training, sort of. So I wasn't a counselor, but we were going to this program where you would wash the dishes and set the tables in the dining hall and everything, and kind of clean the grounds of the campground. And then we'd do these long devotional sessions, and you'd really work it was kind of funny. I think it was technically probably illegal what they were doing. Well, not technically, but they were working kids who were under 16 way more than 10 hours a day. But they would stack the chairs into a game or something, so it's not really working. You're doing an exercise or whatever. They'd do all sorts of shit like that.
Clean the floor. No, that old fun game. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember during the devotionals one time, this was a very evangelical Protestant Christian camp. And the counselor who was doing the session just said, he just made the statement that all Catholics go to hell. And I was just like, what? And he actually asked the question, like, why do all Catholics go to hell? And I said, is it the same reason all Protestants go to heaven? Kind of in a snarky response way. And he didn't like that, and he got really upset with me. And then I started having more questions about stuff toward the end of that summer. And the response I always got was, you need to pray for more understanding. And I was like, I'm sorry, but that's not a good answer. If I have a question about something and you're just telling me it's the devil coming from behind, or, it's just something I need to pray for more understanding about. I don't know. It's just not good enough of an answer.
That feels a lot like a cop out. Yeah.
But I know you were raised religiously too, right? And was there any sort of rebellion with that growing up, or?
Interestingly enough, because my faith was presented to me, I grew up in a Jewish faith, and in what's called a Messianic Jewish faith, which are the Messianic Jews called themselves the first century Christians. They were basically like the Jews who followed Jesus in that time, and that continues on to the whatever. So anyway, so that was what the tradition I grew up in, and the faith was always presented to me almost from a moral and ethical framework, as opposed to believe in this or you're going to go to hell. Like, that was never really talked to me about that. My dad's actually, now he's retired, but he was actually the rabbi as well. And so it was always presented to me from the standpoint of, he wouldn't say these are moral fables. He would say these are real things that happened and these were real people. But he would present it from an ethical and moral framework that actually made it make more sense to me growing up as a child. As I got into my teens, I started questioning the veracity of the claims being made and of the stories themselves. And I found out more about how, like, the flood story from Noah, that it actually is borrowed from, I think, a Mesopotamian story or a Babylonian story, and how a lot of the myths actually, or the stories in them, are borrowed from previous ones and sort of embellished upon and added the Abrahamic, basically the Bible, the Old Testament was written by Moses and the people during that time, and they're kind of taking all of the various mythologies and framing them into the moral story they're trying to present. Then the New Testament is the continuation of that to try to justify the worship of Christ. And the more that I looked into it, the more that I'm like, yeah, I don't believe this. And so for quite some time, up until actually fairly recently, and it was never a loud rebellion. I don't think I ever went into my parents' room and said, I'm an atheist and you don't get me, or anything like that. I think I just very quietly was like, nah, I don't really believe that. I respect other people's faith, but I don't believe that. And I think for a long time I considered myself an atheist. I definitely am still an agnostic. I think over time I've become equally disenchanted with what I think is sort of the coping narrative of the uncaring, mechanical, purposeless universe. Like the idea that from a universe that doesn't matter, has no purpose, has no meaning, and feels and expects nothing, that it would create these beings who are heavily rooted in trying to find fulfillment and purpose, and extremely emotional and extremely attached and caring. That doesn't seem to line up either. I've kind of, on a religious front, I've kind of resigned myself to, it's likely we'll never know what it is. It's probably in the same way that, like, the little microorganisms in your body don't have either the cognitive or perceptive ability to understand what they're a part of. Like, even if you tried to explain it, it wouldn't, it doesn't have the hardware to be able to even understand or see what's happening. I think we're probably in a similar predicament, and it's probably just best that we do the best that we can to appreciate our existence and manifest it in the way that we treat ourselves and others. That's pretty much where I am with that. But yeah, I was never really super rebellious, but I definitely, as soon as my faith didn't make sense to me, I pretty quickly abandoned it. I just didn't make a big deal of it. I was like, yeah, I don't believe it. So that's pretty much where I was with that.
Yeah, I think that, I was saying earlier, there's a balance between, like, being just a rebellious asshole and actually being thoughtful and questioning things. I think with the atheist community, if that's what we're going to call it, I guess, you see a lot of the needless rebelliousness, especially over something that they don't believe exists. Like, it gets a little obnoxious.
Like they
sometimes.
Care more than anyone else.
Yeah. And I mean, I still call myself an atheist because I don't think there's a better word for it. But like, to me, atheism just means without God. I mean, I think that's the technical definition of atheism, but it's turned into a religion. I mean, when you go full atheist, you just become exactly what you have said that you're trying to get rid of or outdo or whatever. It happens, I'm sure there's a lot of great people in Atheists for Liberty, probably, but they've approached me at a couple different events and brought their flyers over, and because they see the naturalist capitalist thing and they're wondering if it has any connotations of naturalism, which it does. But then I tell them, I'm like, guys, look, just when it's when you guys become an institution of atheists, it's just kind of hard to take you seriously, because then you're basically a religion in my mind. And that's just become a funny thing. Like, I used to actually really enjoy Sam Harris a lot, and some of the people in the intellectual dark web who talked a lot about atheism. And part of the reason I don't anymore is just because of the politics of the last couple of years and seeing how they've reacted to everything. But on top of that, it's like, especially if it's almost like more ridiculous if you're right that there is no God, that you've spent all this time telling people this. It's almost like more pointless at the end of the day. It's just kind of like, who cares? Like, I mean, so it's and that's an evolutionary process I've seen in myself. Like, over the last few years, that argument over whether or not it's true has become like way less important to me, because it's something I used to really argue with people about and really find really interesting, but I just like don't really care anymore that much, because like, if it gets to the point where, being someone who doesn't believe in an afterlife, like if we get to the point where our biggest contention is what happens to us after we die, then we're doing pretty good in my mind. And we're nowhere near that right now. There's stuff that's going on while we're alive that's really bad that we all agree, like, we got to fix this. But any comments on the extreme atheist community? I mean, I love you guys. I know some of you watch my show, but like, Jesus, you guys need Jesus. You need to chill out a little bit.
You need Jesus. That's my thoughts. My thoughts, as someone who does not believe in any of the Abrahamic faiths, is that the average atheist actually needs Jesus in his or her life. Listen, I think that, if it doesn't matter, if none of this matters, and for whatever reason or none at all, we're born, we live, we suffer, we enjoy whatever we enjoy, we suffer through whatever we suffer through, and then we die. And there are people who find peace in the idea of there being, let's say that's not true, but they find peace in it. Who the hell am I to go and make them miserable? Yeah, Sky Daddy's not real, and like present all this stuff that makes them like begrudgingly go, well, then I guess it's not real, and then they're miserable. Like, how does that help anything, right? Now, the new atheists, or the extreme atheists, as you put it, would say, well, but they'll find real happiness. How the hell do you know that? Like, you don't know that. It's very I mean, there are studies that have shown that people that have religious faiths tend to overall have better lifestyles. Like, they typically have lower rates of depression. They typically have, better life markers. Like, any of the metrics you can use, they're typically doing better. Now, some would argue it's because this is a very religious centric world. I'm not sure I believe that. I think that there is something to be said. That could be why we have religion. It could literally just be a successful coping mechanism that humans came up with to try to just cope with this, completely impossible to understand existence, and the questions of why are we here? What happens when we die? Is there anything more to this? Is there a reason for this? Are there things I should be doing, things I shouldn't be doing? Maybe this is just a coping mechanism people have come up with. And yes, maybe some of us don't need it, but maybe some of us do. Mm-hmm. And what the hell business is it of yours? So I have no problem with people, being evangelical atheists. I just want them to acknowledge that they are evangelicals. They are trying to recruit people. They are trying to tell the gospel. They're literally doing all this stuff. And it's probably as a result of that reflects what they've grown up with. But like, they're being the Jehovah's Witnesses and the you know, the fundamentalist Baptists of and the evangelicals of atheism. And I will say I don't consider myself an atheist because at this point I think it, and again, this is my opinion, I believe it makes more intuitive sense that there is something or some things that this is a creation of. I think it's likely that what we see as the observable universe is actually a tiny little microscopic part of something that we can't even begin to comprehend, don't even have the hardware to be able to comprehend, but that there is some kind of reason for this. That makes more sense to me. So for that reason, I don't consider myself an atheist, because there probably is a God or a creator, as opposed to just, you know, a magnet, you know, raw, what was it called, that Darwin called it, raw libido or something that causes all things to happen. But I definitely am agnostic, because I don't know what the hell it is, and I think it's likely we can't know what it is. I think that makes the most sense. But yeah, I'm not trying to rob anyone's joy. I will say this: when people use their religious faith to justify a control or action against someone else and their lives, that's when I will push back and say, listen, your belief about something is valid, and you can use that as you wish. But the moment you're using your religious faith to justify someone else being forced to do or not do something, that's where we're not friends anymore. Like, that's where we're not going to agree anymore. But really, most people that are religious are just like, yeah, I believe this, and, you know, you can believe what you want. And I think a lot of atheists are just, they're probably acting out, you know, trauma from how they were treated when they were forced to be religious. Maybe that's what it is, but it ain't helping, and it's certainly not increasing. If there's nothing else in life, then maybe we should be trying to maximize our joy and that of others, not make everyone miserable. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, what I found funny about the new atheist movement, and like even Christopher Hitchens, people like that, but especially Sam Harris, Bill Maher, some of the people from nowadays, you know, they do make, like, in my opinion, a lot of great critiques of Islam and Christianity. But then most of them are still, they're Zionists, even though they don't believe in God. And I'm just like, I mean, like you're saying, if your religious beliefs push you to stupid ideas, that's when they become bad. It's almost like dumber if you don't believe in anything and you still have these same bad ideas. So like that was kind of when I gave up on them. I was like, all right, whatever, guys. Like, if you're only going to go after these two and you're not going to, and then, you know, even putting Zionism aside, these, especially like Sam Harris, he's a total statist and, you know, total believer in having overlords over your life, telling you what to do, telling you what you're not allowed to do. And, you know, like I'm more forgiving of people who believe in God, because to me, it's a lot more vague, a lot more, like you were saying, kind of unprovable. Right. No one really knows. If you believe in the government and believe the government cares about you, you're just so out to lunch in my line. Like, there is that great skit by George Carlin where it's funny. I still enjoy watching it, but he says, like, the politician doesn't hold a candle to the clergyman. And then he talks about how, like, you know, the religious leaders are the greatest bullshit artists in the world. And I think he's wrong. Like, at least religious leaders, they're dealing with faith. They're dealing with things on a spiritual level. If you're a politician and you're telling people you're going to make their lives better, and you're still getting reelected every year and getting campaign donations and stuff, and you have given them the government they have now, like, that is incredible bullshit artistry in my mind. So
it is, and it's so easily disprovable. Like you said,
exactly.
The questions of, like, faith and God, it's so metaphysical and ethereal, you can't even really define it, right? Like, there's not really a good way to even say, well, how can you prove there is or isn't a God? Because everyone's definition of what that is different. There is no agreeable metric. We can see easily that government doesn't work, like, as an organization, like, structure, using a political process to make decisions and then having central planning be the way that it's carried out, is this sort of uniquely terrible way that human beings have stumbled across to try to organize to accomplish the things that we need done. it actually creates more problems. And then it only ends up serving to feed itself. It's so inefficient, it's so prone to corruption that it ends up becoming its own ends to feed on us. It's like the organization of humans into being parasites, but like in a really inefficient way. And just inefficient enough to convince everyone that, well, they're trying their best. And it's like, no, it's actually just a really shitty way of being parasites. And so, you know, statism is basically a really terrible faith in human beings.
Yeah.
Who have demonstrated themselves to be bad at this.
Yeah.
Like, not just human beings, but like the worst human beings. Like, statism is the worship of politicians, bureaucrats, and the cronies who own them, and believing in them as being the people who should structure the very threads of our society. That to me is so much more insane than saying, you know, I believe, as my ancestors have, that that there is a God who is aware and all-knowing of all things, and for whatever reason created evil, but then punishes us for doing it, and to save us from it, created his only son, who actually isn't his son but kind of is, who then had to die because that was the only way to start. Like, okay, I don't believe that, but that sounds less insane, or that sounds less. Let me put it this way: that sounds less easily disprovable than saying, I think that these politicians who routinely demonstrate themselves as craven, pandering, ineffective liars and thieves are the people we should trust for the most important questions to be settled and the most important solutions that need to be done. That to me is as insane, if not more, and much more easily debunked. And yet here we have Sam Harris supporting it.
Yeah. No, I agree, man. And I have, you know, I've almost come to appreciate religion more in the last couple of years, just because of the upbringing I had and the set of moral values that my parents instilled in me. And, you know, I don't like you, I don't really care if it's based on something factual or not, as long as, you know, as long as those values shine through. That seems to be what matters. And it's so aggravating that so many atheists are statists. Like, I feel like there's a huge overlap. It's weird. There are a lot of like libertarian atheists for some reason, but then I'd say there's a lot more like Democrat atheists than there are Republican atheists. And obviously Republicans for the most part want the government to run your life too, but the Democrats over the last couple of years have been the ones who like obviously want that. And whenever I get into an argument with like a super staunch atheist progressive, it's always funny to me because they don't like the church taking their money. They don't like the church telling them what to put in their bodies or not put in their bodies. They don't like the church having these guys who do these strange rituals and dress up in these weird costumes, having authority over them. And it's like, it's literally all the same stuff. Like, although at least the church is just asking for 10% of your money instead of, you know, 15, 20, depending on how much money you make, however much percentage of your money, and using it to go murder people overseas. At least the church is using it for soup kitchens or something for the most part. So it's just always been funny to me that this group of skeptics is just totally willing to let the government do whatever it wants to do. I still can't understand that.
So the progressive who hates the church and the big business, they don't make the connection that the only time that the church or the big business is forcing them to do something as opposed to asking them to do it, or forcing others to do something, is when they utilize the weapon of the state. Like they utilize the state to do that. You know, if the church is trying to pass its morality through, you know, bans on what it considers immoral behavior, you know, sexual consenting behavior between adults, it doesn't do it itself. It does it through government. Now, you know, 1,000+ years ago, it did it itself, but it was the government at the time, right? So, and if you look at, like in Islam, one of the issues there isn't that the faith itself is against these different things. It's that in Islam, at least in the Islamic world, there is no delineation between politics and faith. So if Islam says that this is not allowed, or if it's interpreted to say that it's not allowed, it's not allowed. And if it says that you have to be killed for this, you have to be killed for this. And if it says that you have to have your hand cut off for something, then you have to have your hand cut off. And so again, the problem there is the mechanism of the state. It's not that people believe this. It's that they believe that there should be a central authority of human beings arbitrarily deciding, or even using a guideline, deciding what you as an individual should or should not be allowed to do, even if what those things are that you want to do or not do doesn't harm anyone else. So yeah, I will say, I think I would venture to guess that libertarianism has a higher, maybe not much higher, but maybe a little bit higher percentage of atheists and agnostics than even the progressives do. Obviously, much larger number of them. So like, even though a higher percentage of libertarians are atheist or agnostic, the overwhelming majority of agnostics and atheists are statists. But that's true of everyone. The vast majority of everything are statists. But yeah, it does not make sense to already have said, I don't care what society thinks. I think that, that this is just a book of fairy tales, and I'm not going to believe it. And then turn around and listen to a politician who has a track record of lying and cheating and stealing, or just showed up and has no idea what they're talking about, and eventually they will have a track record of lying, cheating, and stealing, or they'll get replaced. And believing that, I've even seen that within the Libertarian Party. Like, there is this idea among many libertarians that, well, we just need to replace red and blue with gold. Yeah. No, that's the problem. Isn't the people? It's certainly not the color of the party. It's not the team. It's that the only way that the electoral process is going to accomplish anything for us, whether it's through libertarians or someone else, is if they immediately go in and start nullifying and dismantling this system. Otherwise, we're just going to replace those two evils with this new one. And so even within libertarian circles, the statism is pervasive. And yeah, I say statism is a far more goofy faith than any of the other ones. It's just so easy to disprove.
Yeah. I think, there has been a systematic attempt to remove culture and pride and family values and all these things from families, to destabilize them and make them more dependent on the government. And a lot of libertarians don't like talking about this, but I think it's true. But one of the first places I started noticing it was when I grew up as, when I was a teenager, when I got my first car, I owned that car. I bought it with cash. I had a job, so I went and bought that car with cash, and then I paid for all my own gasoline, all my own repairs, all, the registration fees, all that stuff. My parents didn't do any of it. And some of the other kids, like, they got a car from their parents that their parents didn't even own. They would take a loan out on a car and then let their kid drive it as their car when it's not even registered in their name, and it's also not even owned by their parents. And that's a trend that I started seeing everywhere as I got older. Like, wow, nobody owns anything. They have a lot of stuff, but it's not actually theirs. So the pride of ownership doesn't exist. And I think that that's been almost intentional, through the artificially low interest rates. Just put a dime down and you can get this $40,000 car for this ridiculously low payment every month that you definitely shouldn't be able to get, but we're gonna give it to you anyway. You can have all the perks of ownership, but you will never have that actual pride of owning something yourself. I think that's done a lot to destroy the mentality of Americans, because a big part of the American dream is owning something, right? You own, it's not the king's, it's yours. Like, you own your house, you own whatever, but that's just kind of evaporated. That's just like one of the things that the government has destroyed culturally, the pride of ownership. And, no one cares about it anymore. But do you think that's probably true? I know you were a businessman for a while, so
two of the bedrocks of individuals and a society, or at least communities, that don't really need central planning and actually are against it and reject its ideas. Two of the bedrocks, the foundational underpinnings of that are ownership and family. Now, it's interesting because a lot of people, and I actually first learned this when I called myself a conservative, like in the early and mid 2000s, and they talked about how the government, undermined the Black family and Native families because they knew that was the best way to it was the one thing they had, and they were able to quickly, pick up the pieces when they would be attacked and lose everything, to be able to pick up the pieces and begin, regenerating again, because they had such strong familial structures and such strong concept of individual and personal ownership. And they immediately sought to destroy those things. The thing is, it actually started for the general public. The attack on the family started a lot sooner than people think. One of the first attacks on the family that happened in the US anyway was the idea of the so-called nuclear family that happened in the post-war period. And it was for the dumbest of reasons. It was basically to make a bunch of money for housing developers. So at the end of World War II, you had all these people that were coming back from the war who were either already married or getting married. They're having children. There was the baby boom. And they thought, well, what are we going to, and there were all the people that were working in the factories who did not want to live in the cities. They were going to leave the Black people in the cities and put them in housing, in the permanent housing for the housing projects. But where are we going to put the white people? Certainly not with the Blacks. Where are we going to put them? And so the idea was presented by housing developers. Well, you've got all this land, so why don't we make these suburban communities, and we'll do the FHA Act or the FHA, and basically give subsidized single-family homes to everyone. Well, in order to do that, they also had to present the idea that a real family was not the multi-generational family that human beings had always had up until that point, where you would have a household, whether it was a single home or multiple smaller homes in a very, very close proximity, like walking distance, that would have the children, the parents, but also the grandparents, even the great-grandparents, or even the great-great-grand, like everyone there, cousins, uncles, everything else, really families that, large extended families, the village really just being the extended family. That was replaced with the idea that, well, actually the family is two parents and 2.3 children or whatever. That's a family. And the reason they did that was to maximize the amount of homes that were being sold. And so that was really a grift for the housing development industry. Now, what happened was that was the first generational separation of the family that happened by and large. And that made it easier. Now, when you're removing the family, you're not having to remove your connection with grandparents, great-grandparents, cousins, uncles, everything else. It's really just your parents. That's really all they have to remove, is the parents and the kids, because they've already made that other separation. It made it exponentially easier for them to do the assaults on the concept of the family. And we see now where, even on both sides, people are insistent that if you raise your kids this way, you're bad and the government should stop you. Well, no, that is the final assault on the family, which is parenthood. And if you remove that, and if you make it where the government is essentially the parent, that and elimination of ownership, like you were talking about, are really all it takes to make people entirely devoted and dependent on the state. Devotion comes from dependence, and that is a huge problem.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting noticing that people on the left thought if you didn't vaccinate your kids that you were a child abuser, and then people on the right thought the same thing. If you do vaccinate your kids, you're a child abuser. And then, some people, critical race theory in school is propaganda and they don't want it taught. And then people have all these different standards that you just can't, I don't know, like some of them, I feel like when there's actual child abuse taking place or something, then you can,
of course,
if you're harming the child's body or whatever, like that's different. But
yes,
when it comes to like, I think if you teach my kids about Jesus, that's abuse. And then if you tell my kids that America is an evil country built on racism, that's, it starts to get fuzzy in that area. Like what is actually definitionally propaganda and lies, and
I don't know. That's part of the reason I'm a libertarian, because like having government schools and government programs where people are put under one umbrella, where they're taught this one truth about things, our society's become so split and so disconnected that you can't arrive at a compromise anymore. Like we're just at a point where you have to raise your kids in a system that aligns with your belief systems, because I mean the other side just completely disagrees with you on a foundational level.
Yeah, and the thing is, what ends up happening is, instead of you just having your kids being taught, whether by you or by those that you assign to do it, your values, there's a constant, it is a culture war. And it's not over the culture. The battle is over the stakes of whose way wins. You know, this isn't a war of like, well, I think my way is better than yours. It's, I want my way to be how your children have to be taught. And then the other side goes, well, I want my way to be the way your children have to be taught. Well, we as libertarians see the problem is that the state has to be the arbiter of what every child's being taught in that system. And that's the problem. You know, there are many examples of this outside of schooling, but that's one example. The best way to handle that is to just allow people, again, if there's actual abuse and harm of children, then that's one thing. But outside of that, yeah, if you want to teach your kid a religious belief that you and I think is goofy as hell, that's on you. And if you want to teach them a race-based ideology that you and I also think is goofy as hell, then that's on you. Go ahead and do it. You know, so and if you get government involved with mandating or banning anything, you know, it's just going to make it much worse. It's going to make even the initial problem worse. You know, the one thing I keep going back to is that when you allow government to have this kind of control, they are going to end up forcing something on everyone that almost no one likes, and that's the compromise. Well, the compromise is everyone's miserable. And to your point of, you know, the irreconcilable differences, right now we have both a record high number of people who think that if you just don't want to say that someone who is trans, and I, full disclosure, if someone tells me they're trans, they tell me what their pronouns are, I use them. For me, I mean, I changed my name when I was 3. Identity is a big deal to people. I go with it. I understand if people don't want to do that, that's fine. I personally do. But there are many people, there are a record high number of people who believe that that should be illegal.
Right.
That not using someone's, you know, preferred pronouns or the pronouns that they're using or whatever is like, should be a hate crime, or that it should be illegal.
Yeah.
At the
That's
same
what got
time,
Jordan Peterson in trouble originally, right? Because he was
yes,
saying
the threat of that.
Yeah.
The threat of that. At the same time, you have, certainly in our lifetimes, the highest number of people in at least the last 30, 40, maybe even 50 or 60 years who believe that all gay people and trans people and LGBT people are groomers and pedophiles in waiting, and that an increasing number of them think that should be banned or at least heavily discouraged, or, you know, it shouldn't be talked about at all or anything like that. Those are not reconcilable. There is not a compromise between those. I mean, there is a compromise, which is just go live your own lives and stop trying to force everyone else into something. But within the positions of, you know, should we force this or should we force this? There's not really a reconcilable difference. The only way to try to reconcile that is to stop trying to decide which of those ways are going to be forced on everyone. And it means getting government out of education, but it also means getting government out of ideas like association. Like a person who is a pro-LGBT whatever else should not have to be forced to associate with someone who thinks that they're a pedophile or groomer that should, you know, be in prison for it, and vice versa. Someone who, you know, maybe just, you know, for religious reasons or whatever reasons, you know, isn't really a fan of LGBT people, or even just like the stuff with the wedding cakes. You know, they don't have a problem with gay people. Gay people can come and buy cakes all day long, but they're not going to make a gay wedding cake because it goes against their religion. They shouldn't be forced to have to do that either. And I think a lot of peace comes from letting people freely disassociate instead of trying to have them constantly fight over it. That's one of the root problems with a democratic system, is that you have people constantly fighting over what's forced on everyone instead of just allowing decentralization and letting people make their own decisions.
Yeah, I actually, you played a role in this out in Reno. They changed the language in the party platform when it came to bigotry. And I think the new plank, I'm sorry, I'm going to get in trouble here, but I think
no, it's fine. Go ahead. No, I just, it's just the most annoying thing, but go ahead. No, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think bigotry is such a ridiculous word just because what we were just saying there, like to one person, bigotry is obvious. You know, if you're discriminating against some sort of sexual orientation or race or whatever, to another person, it's religious ideology. To another person, it's something completely different. So it's just like such an empty word, where I think the new platform, the new language basically says we stand for the rights of every individual, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, creed, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And I think there's an important distinction there that a lot of libertarians have missed, because like you said, so basically to be, you know, like, and there's different forms of bigotry. Some of them are more obvious than others, but to someone who is a fundamentalist Christian or a fundamentalist Jew or a fundamentalist Muslim or something, like, I'm going to think some of their associations they want to make are just ridiculous and silly, but they're going to think some of the ones that I would want to make are ridiculous and silly. And at the end of the day, there's nothing we can do about that. So as long as we're not, I think as libertarians, we just have to advocate for the rights of individuals, which includes the right to association, like you said. So I thought that was a good evolution personally.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing with that wording, and it's been weird to watch some of the reactions from people who were like, well, I've always believed bigotry to be irrational and repugnant, and I'm disgusted it was removed. And I'm like, you've never used the word repugnant in your life except to talk about this wording. Like, give me a break. But here's the background on that. For those who don't know, just giving a little bit of background, Plank 3.5, I think it is, from the Libertarian Party platform, talks about discrimination and freedom of association. And in that plank, it has always said that we support the rights of people to discriminate, that if a business owner wants to discriminate for whatever reason, they absolutely can. That government should not be able to, because government is forced association and forced collectivization, and so they should not be allowed to discriminate because they need to treat us all equally if they're going to force us into their system. But that individuals and businesses and private entities can do so. Now, at some point, I think it was actually in the 70s, but then it was removed and added back, but whatever. At some point, a compromise wording was put in, which I believe was a rewording of something Ayn Rand had said about racism being irrational or something like that. And it says, we condemn bigotry as irrational and repugnant. Now, the people who wanted that wording removed, one of their main arguments was that it's the only time we make that kind of value judgment in the platform. Like, there are other places in the platform where it'll say something like, it talks about that the government shouldn't stop people from putting what they want in their body. But then it doesn't follow up and say, but if you do heroin, that's a really bad idea, and you'll probably die or overdose, and that's bad for you. Or it'll say, that the government shouldn't legislate consenting sexual relations between adults. And it doesn't then say, but if you have a bunch of unprotected sex, you could risk STDs and unplanned pregnancies. We say that government should let you have the right to do something. We don't then make a moral judgment on what you should or shouldn't do with that right. So I understand that they were saying that. My problem was, if you just remove that wording without the context of why it's being done, the average person looks at that and goes, oh, so you're cool with bigotry now because you just removed the wording, right? Like, it makes it sound like we're saying we're cool with bigotry. The bigger argument that I kept saying to people was, no one cares. Like, no one besides us is even reading this thing. It does not matter. It's getting exponentially more attention than it will ever get because you just keep talking about the damn thing. But it's got to be done. So I knew that they had more than enough votes to remove the wording. And so I went to a few different people and said, look, how about we replace it with something affirming that we're not trying to say that we're going to, uphold bigotry and discrimination or whatever else, and really restructuring on an affirmative statement of action of what we'll actually do to protect people. And they said, okay, well, give us the wording. So in an embarrassingly relatively short period of time, I wrote up, we uphold and defend the rights of all people, regardless of their race, gender, or race, ethnicity, or any other aspect of their identity, or whatever the wording was. And it passed almost unanimously. And some people are upset about it, and I get that. But like you said, bigotry means so much to so many different people. It's not terribly well defined anymore. The actual definition of bigotry is an intolerance of the beliefs and identities of others. Well, a lot of us are bigots then. Almost all of us are bigots then, if that's the fact. I mean, I'm intolerant of a lot of ideologies, right? So right there, I'm a bigot. Also, it doesn't actually say we're going to do anything. So if like you're, because you're white or because you're a man or because of whatever reason, if someone were attacking you because of that, their bigotry towards your being white or a man or from New England or whatever, and I stood there and I went, I think what's happening to you is irrational and repugnant. That doesn't really help you. Like that, you go, oh, hey, thanks. That's great. They're beating me up right now. Well, I don't like it at all. That doesn't do a thing for it. Now, if I'm sitting there going, I'm going to get involved because I defend and uphold and defend your rights, and you're being, hurt for no good reason. You didn't do anything wrong. That's an actual affirmative statement of something I'm going to do to defend you. So I think it's actually in that way, it's a more powerful statement. I think for political reasons, I probably would have just left the damn thing as is. But I hope that it was either at least a good compromise, if not an improvement on the existing wording that actually says we're going to do something. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. I think much more importantly, again, no one else but us cares. No one reads our platform. I used to show people our platform and they're like, I'm not going to read that. And I'm like, well, it's only like an 8-minute read. And they're like, I'm not going to read that for 8 minutes. I'm not doing that. So we need to get over ourselves with the damn platform. It's something we refer to. It doesn't matter. It really does not matter to people. We need to show people what libertarianism is, not refer them to a platform. They don't give a crap about it.
No, I agree. I think we should have added a plank about Reed Russell and Clint Coverdale saying we condemn them as irrational and repugnant, and we're going to do something about it. Like an action and we're an accusation.
We uphold and defend the repugnance of Clint Coverdale and Reed Russell, and will not rest until they've been eradicated from the earth. And I think that would have passed by voice vote. I think that I don't think those two monsters should be eradicated. I don't care what happens to me on social media from saying that. I think that they should be eradicated. And I think that, I don't even think we should put them in camps, like just straight to death. Like, I don't think we should risk the possibility of them finding a female who can house their seed and who is willing to do so, or that they God forbid rape or something like that. That we should not like. This is an active threat to humanity and should be treated as such. And I think we should be able to all agree on that. I'm suspect of people that don't agree with me on that.
Yeah. So last question. Are we in a not recession right now?
Yes, we are in a non-recession as defined by the Biden administration. We are in what used to be, up until recently, you bigot, up until recently, a recession was defined by basically everyone as 2 or more consecutive fiscal quarters of a contraction of the gross domestic product, the GDP. But it's a brave new world where the recession means whatever we want it to. And that that's not the fact that we've had 2 or more quarters of economic contraction. That's not a recession. And frankly, I'm waiting for someone to ask someone, what is a recession? And they say, I don't know. I'm not an economist. But I think it is. We're in a recession. And the thing is, adjusted for inflation, we've been in a recession for well over a decade. And that's what actually matters. That's what a lot of people don't want to talk about, is that once you factor in monetary policy, the average person has been in a recession since the 90s and or maybe a couple of times in the early 2000s. but it's been an exception to the rule when we've not been outside of an inflation-adjusted recession. We are now in a non-adjusted recession with record high inflation. So for the average person, they're experiencing a depression, an inflation-adjusted depression. And yet this administration has decided that it is a political winning strategy to deny that that's happening. And I just think that's beautiful. I think it's amazing.
Yeah. I think, the Biden administration, they have condemned recessions as irrational and repugnant. So I think,
yes.
That's really what this comes down to. So
it is,
well, yeah, man, thanks.
Really, we should. And but whereas we defend and uphold the right of recessions to exist, and we'll defend it even if it's whatever its identity is. It is wild. I remember. I know you're trying to wrap up, but I do need to say this. Good. I remember watching The Wizard of Oz, and you see that moment where they realize that the great and powerful Oz is actually this guy behind a curtain, whatever. And he says, "Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain." And I remember thinking, like, well, that's silly. They're literally doing that right now. They are literally right now saying, I know that this is what a recession is. And for the average American who has absolutely no idea what GDP is or anything else, what they're really telling the average American is, I know that you have an income that you used to be able to live on like 2 years ago and now cannot live on that income. But actually things are going really well if you think about it. Also, the most important thing happening right now is a riot that happened over a year and a half ago in DC. That's the most important thing. And we're going to talk about it endlessly. We're going to really not talk about those other riots that happened where you live, or where many of you lived, that happened before that. But we're going to talk about this one riot that happened where I think 5 people died, and in which it affected us. That's way more important. Your suffering never will matter, and we're actually going to pretend it doesn't exist. And the fact that they think that's a winning strategy, I will be interesting to watch them have to cope with the fact that that was not a winning strategy. Put it that way.
Yeah. I guess I got one more question. Are you a Star Wars fan?
I wouldn't. I'm definitely not as intense of a fan as others, but I'm familiar with the franchise, and I've seen 7 of the 9 movies. Yeah.
Well, that's fair, because I would describe my affinity for January 6th the same way. Like I'm aware of the franchise, just not necessarily a huge fan. It's kind of disappointing or whatever. But I was wondering, are you more impressed with the constant resuscitation of January 6th or Star Wars? Because both of them have outlived their natural life cycle. I would say it's like, geez, guys, you're really pushing it here. We got all these series on Star Wars coming out, and the same with January 6th. Like when this got resuscitated in January, I was like, okay, 1 year anniversary, whatever. But they're still pushing it. Just like, guys, catch a hint. The Rotten Tomatoes review on this would be pretty low from the crowd score. Just saying.
Wow, that's a really good question, because obviously from a longevity standpoint, you'd have to go with Star Wars, right? They've literally taken some really cool cult movies that were made around the time I was born,
right,
and have turned it into a multi-billion-dollar franchise.
They're just getting started with January 6th, though. You never know how long.
That's a good point.
You
can find so I can see it now. Disney presents January 6th, and by then AOC is on the rooftop. Gunning down the marauding clones or whatever. No, you're right. It could. I will say for now, I will say Star Wars just because of longevity. But we have to revisit this in a few years, where it is possible that this will have become a multi-billion-dollar franchise. Wait, what am I saying? Way more money has already been spent over January 6th. Actually, I don't know if that's true, because a lot of money's been spent. This is a tough one.
I know.
So I will put it this way. If I were just measuring from the last 2 years, year and a half, January 6th obviously wins. the longevity of Star Wars makes it win out, you know, without that parameter. But this thing's getting legs. And it's like, despite everyone, this thing has legs. And I could see a scenario in which I was so frustrated I took my glasses off. I could see a situation where in like 10, 15 years, where they're still talking about January 6th with the same breathlessness that they talked about 9/11 for several years. With the difference being that on 9/11, thousands of people died, and we were all scared that it was going to happen where we are too, or keep happening. No one, I mean, outside of that immediate area and a handful of like hyper liberal progressives, most people were like, oh, that's unfortunate, or oh man, I wish that worked, or whatever. But then they moved on with their life because it was a riot. It was a riot, and a few people died. And I would say it was misplaced anger. I would also say that some politicians experienced a no-knock raid and did not like it. But I think that it was a riot that was misplaced frustration and anger, and it was unfortunate, and it happened. And we probably need to move on, guys. Like they have really made this a whole ass thing, while simultaneously telling people that like cannot make ends meet, middle class, 2-income families, households, telling them, yeah, everything's fine, you're good.
Yeah,
I think it's incredible. It's just insane to me. It's way crazier than Oz saying don't look at them.
Another parallel, you know how in the first Star Wars movie they take out the Death Star with just a couple X-Wing fighters or whatever?
Yes.
They took down the Capitol with just a guy in a buffalo suit. So, it's another strange parallel. Like maybe we should be rethinking, I don't know. Just saying. I really put some thought
into
this.
That was a womp rat. That was a womp rat. So I know they say like, this exhaust hole is no threat to us. You could barely fit a womp rat in there or whatever. And
that is
he
a womp
actually
rat.
he was wearing, that guy is an actual womp rat. That's funny. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with these parallels, but they do exist and I have to acknowledge them. So thank you for ending the show on that.
Yeah, I uphold the rights of these parallels to exist regardless of their, their silliness or whatever.
Whereas I condemn womp rats as irrational and repugnant because I'm a real libertarian, but whatever.
Yeah. I do like using that phrase just in general now. I condemn things as irrational and repugnant. It's fun, like I do that.
I actually floated, I think it was Dave Smith I said this to. We considered the possibility of completely scrapping the entire platform and just replacing it with the word pugnant. And like just unironically, when someone's like, what do libertarians believe? We're like, actually, we have a very easy to read platform. If you go to lp.org platform and they go on and like, there's no formatting on the page. It's like when you go to a page and it just says this space intentionally left blank and like, in Times New Roman, this would just say pugnant, period. And I think that we should consider that in 24 when we have our next convention. We should consider that as a kind of a come together moment. Really, just strip away, distill it down to the basics of what libertarianism is about, which is pugnant.
Yeah, totally. All right, man. I know you're going to be at Young Americans for Liberty in Florida in a week with me. I'll be there too. Any other events you got coming up that you want to advertise, and where can people keep up with all your stuff you got doing?
Man, I mean, I'd have to pull up my calendar. It's that intense now. I'm actually coming
to my neck of the woods soon, right? Up to Maine or something, you said?
Yeah, I got a thing in Maine coming up. I'm literally pulling out my calendar because so this coming weekend I'm going to be in DC or Alexandria for the Libertarian Party meetup. Then I'm going to be at Young Americans for Liberty. Then I'm getting a few weeks off after that, but then I'm going to be at we're planning a tour through Texas. I'm going to be at the Liberty Speaks Forum in Maryland. I'm going to be at LibertyCon. This stuff's all in October. I got a lot of stuff going on. If you want to follow where I'm going to be at, go to SpikeCohen.com. You can find me on all social media. If you just look up Spike Cohen, I'm on all the stuff that Reed's been kicked off of, holding the flame for him. By
the way, thanks for the shout out on Timcast. I know I met you in person the other week in Vegas and told you that, but want to publicly thank you for the amazing shout out for testing the waters of free speech, conservative
butchering
social
your
media.
name. But yes, and butchering your name in the process. It's Coverdale, correct?
It's Coverdale.
Okay. It is Coverdale. I said Coverdale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's actually funny
Whatever.
throughout this show. I think you said Coverdale and Coverdale, and I think I accept that you don't even cognizantly notice the difference, that it just like goes.
I don't know what your name is. I don't know what your name is. I don't assign enough mental bandwidth to realize how to even say your name. I'm happy that I say your first name correctly, which is Red, of course.
Yeah.
No,
I was gonna say not too many people mess up the first name.
No, I was. That's a tough one. That's pretty repugnant. That's pretty repugnant. But I on your when I mentioned you on Timcast, he's talking about free speech platforms. I'm like, they're conservative speech platforms, and it was just the easiest thing on earth to tell your story. I'm like, this guy's on there for a matter of seconds, and we'll say Israel did 9/11. And just immediately get kicked off doing the Lord's work, frankly. And as we were talking about before, the atheists need Jesus. You're doing the Lord's work. But yeah, so if you follow me on the social media, I'm Spike Cohen on everything. I have my podcast that I do on Muddied Waters Media. You can find that on all social media and all podcasting platforms. I have launched my political organization where You Are the Power, where we are doing localized single issue activism across the country. If you want to be a part of that, go to youarethepower.net. And the North Star is if at any point you ever find yourself lost and unable to find me, just go to the ATF social media and there you will find me. And again,
look in the replies.
I love you. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, of course, man. It's going to be good to see you again in a week. It's been great getting to know you over the last couple years, and
absolutely,
I appreciate everything you do. So thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you. I appreciate you too, man.